Hi people, Clarissa Mosley, psychologist, psychotherapist, spiritual seeker, coming to you amongst the COVID crisis. And I know I seem happy because I want to give you some positive action to take during this terrible time. What I'm going to help you do is develop yourself to a greater depth of your own individual humanity, to develop you emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically throughout this time. Now, I have to first acknowledge the amount of collective grief that is in the whole planet. We are losing our way of being really suddenly. So I acknowledge that we're all having a little bit of a different experience with our restrictions and our isolation experiences. But the collective sense of loss and grief is one that I know is very widely shared. People have lost their jobs, they have lost their way of living, they have lost their sense of safety, predictability, and reliability in the world. We're having a massive identity crisis. I've referred to it as a collective global ego death. And I will be talking about this repeatedly because I think it's really a good way of looking at what's happening. Our way of being in the world has completely changed. When we have our ego death, it's usually when all of the supporting structures that made us know who we were are taken away. And we go through a period of time where we really don't know ourselves. We don't know the reality that we're in. We don't have anything to sort of clutch onto. It's exactly what's happening right now. We don't know our lives anymore. They're so different. We don't have any certainty to attach to. We're in isolation and lockdown here for an unknown period of time. Nobody's saying, oh, in 2 weeks, everything's going to be normal again. They're not. They're saying maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months. We don't know. We call it weird. We call it strange. We call it crazy. But at the end of it, it is what it is. And we have to accept it with an as-isness. And then we have to get through this long period, this unknown period of being alone in our house or only with the people that we live with and being with ourselves. So how do we deal with this loss? How do we deal with this uncertainty? How do we move forward? And most importantly, how can we become a better person and develop ourselves emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually from this experience? What I'm going to help you do is develop yourself to a greater depth of your own individual humanity, to develop you emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically throughout this time. With all grieving processes, there is a wave where you will have times where you're okay and times where you can fall down into a pit of despair. Know that these waves are normal, that these cycles are normal, that also what we're going through now is a cycle, and that soon the curve will flatten and things will go back to the new normal. Let's not worry about that now, because putting our mind in the future is anxiety provoking at the best of times. So now we cannot know what the future brings. We hope to get back to our life as it was. This too will pass, but we all know at some very discomforting level that things are never quite going to be the same again. Just the same as when you've lost a loved one, you know your life is never going to be the same again. When you lost a job and you're uncertain of your financial future, you know your life is never going to be the same again. Now, I know I'm not sounding too positive here, but we also have to acknowledge that maybe our lives collectively as they were not the best. We're not the best for the highest good of all concerned. So whatever that future may hold, I want you to emerge into that new future bigger, better, and more whole than before. So to use this time of additional stress and grief and loss and isolation to actually work on yourself. Get to know yourself at a deep emotional level. Now, as a psychologist and a psychotherapist, I know that most people kind of go, when they hear this. They're like, I don't want to go into those deep, dark places. It's scary. That's what I spent my whole life being busy trying to avoid. Well, the sad truth is that the busyness that we once were able to avoid things with has dissolved for a lot of people. It's just been taken away. So let's do the inner work as best we can. Let's tolerate small amounts of going within and being curious. So you don't need to go within and go, oh, life's hopeless, this is the worst thing in the world, because we don't actually know that. Our ego identity tends to do something that we call in psychotherapy, it tends to make catastrophic expectations about the future. It's kind of like our ego identity is a bit of a drama queen. So it will kind of go, whatever is going to happen is going to be bad and tragic, and they're going to take over, and we're never going to get our freedom back. And all of these stories, there's a lot of conspiracy stories, there's a lot of people that are, their anxiety is coming out in a way that is dramatizing whatever may happen and what's happening now. That's okay, you can do that for a bit, but it's not useful to totally stay there and engage in that the whole time. There's a point where you can actually become aware that you're doing that you can actually drop into this curiosity like, oh, there I go again. There I go again, reading more news articles, getting upset, feeling tense and anxious, worrying about the future. So all you have to do is not punish yourself for doing that. Please don't ever punish yourself for doing anything. I want you to learn self-compassion. I want you to learn how to be kinder to yourself in these times. But when you do observe yourself doing this, you can simply observe and be aware of it. And as soon as you do become aware of what you're doing, you have a greater capacity to change. So cultivating our awareness during this is something that we can all do, and it will help us to become more self-aware. So the ego identity that I'm referring to is kind of like how we get along in the world. It's that sense of separate self. It's that facet of us that plans into the future, which is why the ego death is so profound right now, because the future is very unknown. And it makes judgments and holds beliefs about things, and storehouse of all of our memories and our expectations of the future, and also our self-identity, which was often attached to what we did and who we were with and our status in the world. And for many people, that has completely disappeared. Our ego identity also kind of likes to be busy doing something. And I know that is quite endemic in Sydney. I know many cities around the world, they're fast-paced. We're always going somewhere. We're always busy. Our sense of importance can come from being so busy. Now you're not busy. Now you have no excuse not to reconnect with people and not to reconnect with yourself. And that can be seen as a positive. But we have to acknowledge how difficult it is for our ego identities to endure this, because everything that we used to attach ourselves to is taken away. So there's a big void in our lives. And for many people, we are left with their own emotions and their own self for extended periods of time for the very first time. And I acknowledge how difficult that can be, particularly if there was already a tendency towards depression or anxiety. So we need to consciously try and put the brakes on that. If you're one who tends towards depression, you need to consciously be aware of how you might fall into that pit. A lot of depression and anxiety curiously comes from our comparison with others or with where we think we should be in our life and in the world. It's like that voice, the inner critic that drives us to be better, to be thinner, to be better looking, to have more, to have a better house, a better car. That aspect can't really attach to anything right now. There's nothing to yearn for now except for getting back outside and getting back into some resemblance of our life. So that drivenness is taken away from many people, and it leaves this kind of space. And the space is something that we can, surrender and relax into. And there will be irritation in that for people that were particularly addicted to being busy and were particularly dependent on their busyness to avoid inner pain and turmoil. So being really aware of that and really gentle with yourself as you surrender into those feelings just a little bit. The skill is developing tolerance to experience your own emotions and your inner world in small pieces that are manageable, and to do this with kindness and self-compassion. And while you are doing it, that to be aware of the voice in your head that is often self-critical and judgmental, and to tell it to shush up and to be compassionate with yourself, to respond to yourself with self-love. So to recap, to deal with the uncertainty at present, which the ego identity, which our main way of being does not like at all, the antidote is in fact surrender. Surrender is a very important spiritual quality to be able to cultivate right now. It is not giving up. It is allowing. It is letting go into what may be. And ultimately, the surrender can be to the divine purpose in all of this. So if we assume that our ego identities have to let go of this driven, pushy me, I want this, that hungry ghost of the ego just forever wanting more for itself. And now there's a massive leveling in the world where the opportunity for us all to surrender into what is at this present time is available. There's nothing for the hungry ghost to grab for, to eat for right now. There's basic supermarket supplies, nothing, there's no shops, here in Sydney really open worth going to. All of these things. So we can actually look at this time as an opportunity for our ability to tolerate being with our own emotional selves and to surrender to what this moment in time is asking us to do. So to let go of the drivenness of the ego for just a little while, like put it on the shelf and surrender into this time. The other aspect of personal growth that you can develop now is being aware of how your ego identity may have been addicted to hoarding. So nothing is ever enough when you're coming from the point of ego. Researchers found that we only had a short period of happiness when we got something new, and then we would just return to baseline. So that aspect of getting something, of getting more, was only a temporary satisfaction for the ego, because true satisfaction comes from being able to be with yourself and know who you are and know that that is enough, and know that you don't need necessarily anything more for your happiness other than obviously to have your basic needs met. But you don't actually have to keep going out and getting more and more. And I feel that this is another one of the beautiful things and opportunities that we have within this crisis, is there is no prospect in actually being able to go out and get more or yearn for more in this time. We are actually brought back to some really basic values in our life in terms of what we actually really need. So the antidote to the ego's, to our egoic need to get more and to be that hungry ghost and to hoard, is actually to focus on the abundance that is actually right here and now with us. Whatever you have is very likely to be an awful lot more than anyone else has got. There's always people that have less. But it's not around that hierarchy. It's actually falling into this deep appreciation, this actual acknowledgement of valuing what you actually do have. That things become a little bit more important because you've lost that drivenness to go and get more and more and more. The rat race is turned off for a while. There is no, need to sort of search for that promotion. If you've lost your job, you suddenly become very appreciative that you actually had a job. So the flip side of this, into switching into the spiritual aspect, is to acknowledge the abundance, the abundance that you already have, the abundance in actually just having enough. So the abundance mindset is grateful for what it has, for what is, for what already exists. There is a gratitude in the smaller things in life. So that's another point of reorientation that you can allow into your life. So within all this, I hope I've given you some things to reflect on, some things to do while you're at home alone, rather than, when you're done binging on Netflix and when you've scrolled through every single post on Facebook and when you're absolutely over watching the latest news reports, then you can actually spend some time being with you and reflecting on things in your life, reflecting on who you are as a person that isn't now attached to what you do, what you own, who you're going out with, what you look like, what your hair is like because you can't get your hair done. All of those aspects where you had to actually go out and show up in front of people. I hope I have given you some things to think about while you're in isolation at home alone, that there is some positivity that we can gain out of this. This is not to say that this isn't terrible, that there aren't people suffering, that this isn't something to be taken seriously. This is simply to say that there are opportunities within this to develop yourself and to develop yourself emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. And we'll talk more about this in future videos. And I'm really happy that you've spent this time with me today. And I'm reaching out, giving you a big virtual hug and all the love that you've always deserved. Namaste.